Hey, good girl. 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 Hey, good girl.
Oh, you didn't know? Your ass better call somebody!
Yo. 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 So welcome in everybody. This is reading stream number 5. I don't think I even typed my title right. Did I type the title right? Yes. Reading stream number 5 out of potentially 6. And I kept saying that next week was going to be... What's up, Krisnetch? I kept saying that next week was going to be July 4th and that we were going to have to push the final stream back. But next week is not July 4th. It's the week after. So that actually is perfect. Next week, we will finish up this book. We're going to read tonight. We're going to read tomorrow. And then whatever book is winning by this weekend will be the next one that we will start on July 11th, the week after July 4th. Ooh, excuse me. So we'll have 1 week in between finishing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and our next book, which right now it looks like it's going to be Wizard of Oz. Looks like it's going to be Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So it'll be just interesting, though, after that, when we do the next vote of whether we want one of the other 3 books I put or the second Wizard of Oz. So I guess that'll depend upon how well I do in reading the books. All right. We've got 4 half-hour maps that we're going to do. And then we'll do quicker maps after we get through with the long maps. So get your balls on the track. Get your balls on the track. ! Play to play. What's up, Insomniac? So if you'll remember, last time we had a lot of excitement. There's been a lot of things that have happened in the last couple events. We had a fight. We had a fight with a shark. We had a crew member die mysteriously during a time when we were sent to our quarters. Conseil, Ned Land, and Professor Ahana were all sent to their quarters. And it was really weird. Next thing and this was after a crew member was injured and let them go to, didn't want to see where the burial ground for crew members was under the sea. Also was shown that he's giving money to somebody in the Mediterranean, money that he has found off a sunken treasure with just so much money buried under the sea. And though he goes and regularly collects it and sends it to somebody. Also, Ned Land is saying, hey, are we ever leaving? We've been here a while. Are we ever leaving? Even though Captain Nemo has us here, he can't keep us here forever. If we want to go, we can get out of here. So they were talking about perhaps leaving. And this is when we found out with the gold that they were collecting, because when they came out of the Mediterranean, they were rounding Portugal, and Ned Land said, "Our time's not done. We can get out here near Portugal, find a way to safety." And then they found themselves at the bottom of the sea, and they were collecting the gold. And Captain Nemo showed some emotion. His enigmatic character, who's above all else, still saved the diver from the shark, took on a shark with a knife, and is feeding money to oppressed people and considers himself one with the oppressed. So we learn a little bit more. And that's kind of where we're going to get started on it. they were planning on leaving at the next possible time. The possible time has not quite approached it yet. Professor Ahanat does not want to leave. Well, wants to leave eventually, but wants to complete. They went all over the Pacific. They went over the Indian Sea. They navigated the Suez Canal. They went through the Mediterranean, but they hadn't been through the Atlantic. He really wants to see the Atlantic, but understands that they do have to take the time if the time arises. So that's what we're going to get into, guys. If you want to get into the marbles race, we're going to do 4 1.5-hour race. This first one will probably take longer than a half hour. The last one will probably be just under half an hour. They kind of go shorter each time. But go ahead and get into the race. Type an exclamation point play to get into the marbles race. I am going to put a 5-minute timer on for the first one. A 5-minute timer on for the first one. And then we're going to take that down at, to 180. Probably 2 minutes. Probably 2 minutes on the next race. So here we go. 3 minutes on the timer. Play to play. Get them in, get them on, get them on, get them in. And we're going to go ahead and run this battle so that we can kind of be synced up. It's only 3 minutes early, but we want our first good chunk of a half-hour reading time. So get your balls on the track, and then we are going to start reading. Again, this is going to be our next to last. Oh, I got to silence this too. I'm sorry about that. All right. Impulse, Arwan, and Dewap get the boni. All right, so just got our epic or our legendary placement quest done. I do have to place 2 more barbarians, so I hope I remember that. And let's get into it. Three more minutes to get in. And we only have 4 of us in there right now, so this could be a little rough. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Reading Stream 5. Part 2, Chapter 9. A Vanished Continent. The next morning, the 19th of February, I saw the Canadian enter my room. I expected this visit. He looked very disappointed. "Well, sir," said he. "Well, Ned, fortune was against us yesterday." "Yes, that captain must needs stop exactly at the hour we intended leaving his vessel." "Yes, Ned, he had business at his banker's." "His banker's?" "Or rather, his banking house. By that, I mean the ocean, where his riches are safer than in the chests of the state." I then related to the Canadian the incidents of the preceding night, hoping to bring him back to the idea of not abandoning the captain, but my recital had no other result than an energetically expressed regret from Ned that he had not been able to take a walk on the battlefield of Vigo on his own account. "However," said he, "all is not ended. It's only a blow of the harpoon lost. Another time we may succeed, and tonight, if necessary. In what direction is the Nautilus going? I asked. I do not know, replied Ned. Well, at noon we shall see the point. The Canadian returned to Conseil. As soon as I was dressed, I went into the saloon. The compass was not reassuring. The course of the Nautilus was south-southwest. We were turning our backs on Europe. I waited with some impatience till the ship's place was pricked on the chart. At about 11:30, the reservoirs were emptied, and our vessel rose to the surface of the ocean. I rushed towards the platform. Ned Land had preceded me. No more land in sight. Nothing but an immense sea, some sails on the horizon, doubtless those going to San Roque in search of favorable winds for doubling the Cape of Good Hope. The weather was cloudy. A gale of wind was preparing. Ned raved and tried to pierce the cloudy horizon. He still hoped that behind all that fog stretched the land he so longed for. At noon, the sun showed itself for an instant. The second profited by this brightness to take its height. Then, the sea becoming more billowy, we descended, and the panel closed. An hour after, upon consulting the chart, I saw that the position of the Nautilus was marked at 16 degrees 17 minutes longitude and 33 degrees 22 minutes latitude at 150 leagues from the nearest coast. There was no means of flight, and I leave you to imagine the rage of the Canadian when I informed him of our situation. For myself, I was not particularly sorry. I felt lightened of the load which had oppressed me and was able to return with some degree of calmness to my accustomed work. That night, about 11 o'clock, I received a most unexpected visit from Captain Nemo. He asked me very graciously if I felt fatigued from my watch of the preceding night. I answered in the negative. Then, Monsieur Ahana, I propose a curious excursion. Propose, Captain? You have hitherto only visited the submarine depths by daylight under the brightness of the sun. Would it suit you to see them in the darkness of the night? Most willingly. I warn you, the way will be tiring. We shall have far to walk and must climb a mountain. The roads are not well kept. What you say, Captain, only heightens my curiosity. I am ready to follow you. Come then, sir. We will put on our diving dresses. Arrived at the robing room, I saw that neither of my companions nor any of the ship's crew were to follow us on this excursion. Captain Nemo had not even proposed my taking with me either Ned or Conseil. In a few moments we had put on our diving dresses and placed on our backs the reservoirs abundantly filled with air, but no electric lamps were prepared. I called the captain's attention to the fact. They will be useless, he replied. I thought I had not heard all right, but I could not repeat my observation, for the captain's head had already disappeared in its metal case. I finished harnessing myself. I felt them put an iron-pointed stick into my hand, and some minutes later, after going through the usual form, we set foot on the bottom of the Atlantic at a depth of 150 fathoms. Midnight was near. The waters were profoundly dark, but Captain Nemo pointed out in the distance a reddish spot, a sort of large light shining brilliantly about 2 miles from the Nautilus. What this fire might be, what it could feed it, why and how it lit up the liquid mass, I could not say. In any case, it did light our way vaguely, it is true, but I soon accustomed myself to the peculiar darkness, and I understood, under such circumstances, the uselessness of the Ruhmkorff apparatus. As we advanced, I heard a kind of pattering above my head, the noise redoubling, sometimes producing a continual shower. I soon understood the cause. It was rain, falling violently and crisping the surface of the waves. Instinctively, the thought flashed across my mind that I should be wet, though, by the water, in the midst of the water. I could not help laughing at the odd idea, but indeed, in the thick diving dress, the liquid element is no longer felt, and one only seems to be in an atmosphere somewhat denser than the terrestrial atmosphere, nothing more. After half an hour's walk, the soil became stony. Medusae, microscopic crustacea, and pinatules lit it slightly with their phosphorescent gleam. I caught a glimpse of pieces of stone covered with millions of zoophytes and masses of seaweed. My feet often slipped upon this sticky carpet of seaweed, and without my iron-tipped stick, I should have fallen more than once. In turning round, I could still see the whitish lantern of the Nautilus beginning to pale in the distance. But the rosy light which guided us increased and lit up the horizon. The presence of this fire underwater puzzled me in the highest degree. Was I going towards a natural phenomena as yet unknown to the savants of the earth? Or even, for this thought had crossed my brain, had the hand of man aught to do with this conflagration? Had he fanned this flame? Was I to meet in the depths companions and friends of Captain Nemo, whom he was going to visit and whom, like him, led the strange existence? Should I find down there a whole colony of exiles who, weary of the miseries of the earth, had sought and found independence in the deep ocean? All these foolish and unreasonable ideas pursued me, and in this condition of mind, overexcited by the succession of wonders continually passing before my eyes, I should not have been surprised to meet at the bottom of the sea one of those submarine towns of which Captain Nemo dreamed. Our road grew lighter and lighter. The white glimmer came in rays from the summit of a mountain about 800 feet high, but what I saw was only a reflection, developed by the clearness of the waters. The source of this inexplicable light was a fire on the opposite side of the mountain. In the midst of this stony maze furrowing the bottom of the Atlantic, Captain Nemo advanced without hesitation. He knew this dreary road. Doubtless he had often traveled over it and could not lose himself. I followed him with unshaken confidence. He seemed to me like a genie of the sea, and, as he walked before me, I could not help admiring his stature, which is outlined in black of the luminous horizon. It was 1 a.m. when we arrived at the first slopes of the mountain, but to gain access to them, we must venture through the difficult paths of a vast copse. Yes, a copse of dead trees, without leaves, without sap, trees, petrified by the action of the water and here and there overtopped by gigantic pines. It was like a coal pit still standing, holding by the roots to the broken soil, whose branches, like fine black paper cuttings, showed distinctly on the watery ceiling. Picture to yourself a forest in the hearts hanging on to the sides of the mountain, but a forest swallowed up. The paths were encumbered with seaweeds and fucus, between which groveled a whole world of crustacea. I went along, climbing the rocks, striding over extended trunks, breaking the sea bindweed which hung from one tree to the other, and frightening the fishes, which flew from branch to branch. Pressing onward, I felt no fatigue. I followed my guide, who was never tired. What a spectacle! How could I express it? How paint the aspect of those woods and rocks in this medium? Their underparts dark and wild, the upper colored with red tints by that light, which the reflecting powers of the water doubled. We climbed rocks which fell directly after with gigantic bounds and the low growling of an avalanche. To right and left ran along dark galleries where sight was lost. Here opened vast glades which the hand of man seemed to have worked, and I sometimes ask myself if some inhabitant of these submarine regions would not suddenly appear to me. But Captain Nemo was still mounting. I could not stay behind. I followed boldly, and my stick gave me good help. A false step would have been dangerous on the narrow passes sloping down to the sides of the gulfs, but I walked with firm step, without feeling any giddiness. Now I jumped a crevice, the depth of which I would have made me hesitate had it been among the glaciers of the land. And now I ventured an unsteady trunk of a tree thrown across from one abyss to the other, without looking under my feet, having only the eyes to admire the wild sights of this region. There, monumental rocks, leaning on their regularly cut bases, seemed to defy all laws of equilibrium. From between their stony knees, trees sprang like a jet under heavy pressure, and upheld others which upheld them. Natural towers, large scarps, cut perpendicularly like a curtain, inclined at an angle which the laws of gravitation could never have tolerated in terrestrial regions. 2 hours after quitting the Nautilus, we had crossed the line of trees, and 100 feet above our heads rose the top of the mountain, which cast a shadow on the brilliant irradiation of the opposite slope. Some petrified shrubs ran fantastically here and there, Fishes got up under our feet like birds in the long grass. The massive rocks were rent with impenetrable fractures, deep grottos, and unfathomable holes at the bottom of which formidable creatures might be heard moving. My blood curdled when I saw enormous antennae blocking my road, or some frightful claw closing with the noise of in the shadow of some cavity. Millions of luminous spots shone brightly in the midst of the darkness. They were the eyes of giant crustacea crouched in their holes, giant lobsters setting themselves up like halberdiers and moving their claws with the clicking sound of pincers. Titanic crabs pointed like a gun on its carriage, and frightful-looking pulps interweaving their tentacles like a living nest of serpents. We had now arrived on the first platform, where other surprises awaited me. Before us lay some picturesque ruins which betrayed the hand of man and not that of the Creator. There were vast heaps of stone, amongst which might be traced the vague and shadowy forms of castles and temples, clothed with a world of blossoming zoophytes, and over which, instead of ivy, seaweed and fucus threw a thick vegetable mantle. But what was this portion of the globe which had been swallowed by cataclysms? Who had placed these rocks and stones like cromlechs of prehistoric times? Where was I? Whither had Captain Nemo's fancy hurried me? I would fain have asked him, not being able to. I stopped him. I seized his arm. But shaking his head and pointing to the highest point of the mountain, he seemed to say, "Come along, come higher." I followed it. In a few minutes I had climbed to the top, which for a circle of 10 yards commanded the whole mass of rock. I looked down the side we had just climbed. The mountain did not rise more than 700 or 800 feet above the level of the plain, but on the opposite side it commanded from twice that height the depths of this part of the Atlantic. My eyes ranged far over a large space lit like by a violent fulguration. In fact, the mountain was a volcano. At 50 feet above the peak, in the midst of a rain of stones and scoriae, a large crater mass vomiting forth torrents of lava which fell in a cascade of fire into the bosom of the liquid mass. Thus situated, this volcano lit the lower plain like an immense torch, even to the extreme limits of the horizon. I said that the submarine crater threw up lava, but no flames. Flames require the oxygen of the air to feed upon, and cannot be developed underwater, but streams of lava, having in themselves the principles of their incandescence, can obtain a white heat, fight vigorously against the liquid element, and turn it to vapor by contact. Rapid currents bearing all these gases in diffusion and torrents of lava slid to the bottom of the mountain like an eruption of Vesuvius on another Terra del Greco. There, indeed, under my eyes, ruined, destroyed, lay a town, its roofs open to the sky, its temples fallen, its arches dislocated, its columns lying on the ground, from which one could still recognize the massive character of a Tuscan architecture. Further on, some remains of a gigantic aqueduct. Here, the high base of an acropolis, with the floating outline of a Parthenon. There, traces of a quay, as if an ancient port had formerly abutted on the borders of the ocean and disappeared with its merchant vessels and its war galleys. Farther on again, long lines of sunken walls and broad deserted streets, a perfect Pompeii escaped beneath the waters. Such was the sight that Captain Nemo brought before my eyes. Where was I? Where was I? I must know at any cost. I tried to speak, but Captain Nemo stopped me by a gesture, and picking up a piece of chalkstone, advanced to a rock of black basalt and traced the one word: Atlantis. What a light through my mind! Atlantis! The Atlantis of Plato, that continent denied by Origen and Humboldt, who placed its disappearance amongst legendary tales. I had it there now before my eyes, bearing upon it the unexceptionable testimony of its catastrophe. The region thus engulfed was beyond Europe, Asia, and Libya, beyond the columns of Hercules, where those powerful people, the Atlantides, lived, against whom the first wars of ancient Greeks were waged. Thus, led by the strangest destiny, I was treading under the foot the mountains of this continent, touching with my hand those ruins 1,000 generations old and contemporary with the geological epochs. I was walking on the very spot where the contemporaries of the first man had walked. While I was trying to fix in my mind every detail of this grand landscape, Captain Nemo remained motionless, as if petrified in mute ecstasy, leaning on a mossy stone. Was he dreaming of those generations long since disappeared? Was he asking them the secret of human destiny? Was it here this strange man came to steep himself in historical recollections and live again this ancient life, he who wanted no modern one? What would I not have given to know his thoughts, to share them, to understand them? We remained for an hour at this place, contemplated the vast plains under the brightness of the lava, which was sometimes wonderfully intense. Rapid tremblings ran along the mountain caused by internal bubblings. Deep noise, distinctly transmitted through the liquid medium, were echoed with majestic grandeur. At this moment the moon appeared through the massive waters and threw her pale rays on the buried continent. It was but a gleam, but what an indescribable effect! The captain rose, cast one last look on the immense plain, and then bade me follow him. We descended the mountain rapidly. In the mineral forest once passed, I saw the lantern of the Nautilus shining like a star. The captain walked straight to it, and we got on board as the first rays of light whitened the surface of the ocean. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Submarine Coal Mines. The next day, the 20th of February, I awoke very late. The fatigues of the previous night had prolonged my sleep until 11 o'clock. I dressed quickly and hastened to find the course the Nautilus was taking. The instruments showed it to be still toward the south, with a speed of 20 miles an hour and a depth of 50 fathoms. The species of fishes here did not differ much from those already noticed. There were rays of giant size, 5 yards long, and endowed with great muscular strength, which enabled them to shoot above the waters. Sharks of many kinds, amongst others, one 15 feet long, with triangular sharp teeth, and whose transparency rendered it almost invisible in the water. Amongst bony fish, Conseil noticed some about 3 yards long, armed at the upper jaw with a piercing sword. Some bright-colored creatures known in the time of Aristotle by the name of the sea dragon, which are dangerous to capture on account of the spikes on their back. About 4 o'clock, the soil, generally composed of a thick mud mixed with petrified wood, changed by degrees, and it became more stony and seemed strewn with conglomerate and red pieces of basalt and with a sprinkling of lava. I thought that a mountainous region was succeeding the long plains, and accordingly, after a few evolutions of the Nautilus, I saw the southerly horizon blocked by a high wall which seemed to close all exit. Its summit evidently passed the level of the ocean. It must be a continent, or at least an island, one of the Canaries or the Cape Verde Islands. The bearings not being yet taken, perhaps designedly, I was ignorant of our exact position. In any case, such a wall seemed to me to mark the limits of that Atlantis of which we had in reality passed over only the smallest part. Much longer should I have remained at the window admiring the beauties of sea and sky, but the panels closed. At this moment the Nautilus arrived at the side of this high perpendicular wall. What it would do I could not guess. I returned to my room. It no longer moved. I laid myself down with the full intention of waking after a few hours' sleep, but it was 8 o'clock the next day when I entered the saloon. I looked at the manometer. It told me the Nautilus was floating on the surface of the ocean. Besides, I heard steps on the platform. I went to the panel. It was open, but instead of broad daylight as I expected, I was surrounded by profound darkness. Where were we? Was I mistaken? Was it still night? No, not a star was shining, and night is not that utter darkness. I knew not what to think when a voice near me said, "Is that you, Professor?" "Ah, Captain," I answered. "Where are we?" "Underground, sir." "Underground? I exclaimed. And the Nautilus floating still.
It always floats.
But I do not understand.
Wait a few minutes. Our lantern will be lit, and if you liked places, you will be satisfied.
I stood on the platform and waited. The darkness was so complete that I could not even see Captain Nemo, but looking to the zenith exactly above my head, I seemed to catch an undecided gleam, a kind of twilight filling a circular hole. At this instant, the lantern was lit, and its vividness dispelled the faint light. I closed my dazzled eyes for an instant and then looked again. The Nautilus was stationary, floating near a mountain which formed some sort of quay. The lake, then supporting it, was a lake, imprisoned by a circle of walls, measuring 2 miles in diameter and 6 in circumference. Its level, the manometer showed, could only be the same as the outside level, for there must necessarily be a communication between the lake and the sea. The high partitions, leaning forward on their base, grew into a vaulted roof bearing the shape of an immense funnel turned upside down, the height being about 500 or 600 yards. At the summit was a circular orifice by which I had caught the slight gleam of light, evidently daylight. "Where are we?" I asked.
"In the very heart of an extinct volcano, the interior of which has been invaded by the sea after some great convulsion of the earth. While you were sleeping, Professor, the Nautilus penetrated to this lagoon by a natural canal which opens about 10 yards beneath the surface of the ocean. This is its harbor of refuge, a sure, commodious, and mysterious one, sheltered from all gales. Show me, if you can, on the coasts of any of your continents or islands, a road which can give such perfect refuge from all storms."
Certainly," I replied. "You are in safety here, Captain Nemo. Who could reach you in the heart of a volcano? But did I not see an opening at its summit?"
"Yes. Its crater, formerly filled with lava, vapor, and flames, and which now gives entrance to the life-giving air we breathe."
"But what is this volcanic mountain?"
"It belongs to one of the numerous islands with which the sea is strewn. To vessels a simple sandbank, to us an immense cavern. Chance led me to discover it, and chance served me well."
"But what of this refuge, Captain? The Nautilus wants no port."
"No, sir. But it wants electricity to make it move, and the wherewithal to make the electricity, sodium to feed the elements, coal from which to get the sodium, and a coal mine to supply the coal. And exactly on this spot, the sea covers entire forests embedded during the geological periods, now mineralized and transformed into coal. For me, they are an inexhaustible mine."
"Your men follow the trade of miners here, then, Captain?"
"Exactly so. These mines extend under the waves like the mines of Newcastle. Here, in their diving dresses, pickaxe and shovel in hand, my men extract the coal, which I do not even ask, from the mines of the earth. When I burn this combustible for the manufacture of sodium, the smoke escaping from the crater of the mountain gives it the appearance of a still active volcano."
"And we shall see your companions at work?"
"No, not this time at least, for I am in a hurry to continue our submarine tour of the earth. So I shall continue myself withdrawing from the reserve of sodium I already possess. The time for loading is 1 day only, and we continue our voyage. So if you wish to go over the cavern and make the round of the lagoon, you must take advantage of today, Monsieur Arhona."
I thanked the captain and went to look for my companions, who had not yet left their cabin. I invited them to follow me without saying where we were. They mounted the platform. Conseil, who was astonished at nothing, and seemed to look upon it as quite natural that he should wake under a mountain, after having fallen asleep under the waves. But Ned Land thought of nothing but finding whether the cavern had any exit. After breakfast, about 10 o'clock, we went down onto the mountain. "Here we are, once more on land," said Conseil.
"I do not call this land," said the Canadian, "and besides, we are not on it, but beneath it."
Between the walls of the mountains and the waters of the lake lay a sandy shore which, at its greatest breadth, measured 500 feet. On this soil, one might easily make the tour of the lake, but the base of the high partitions was stony ground, with volcanic locks and enormous pumice stones lying in picturesque heaps. All these detached masses, covered with enamel, polished by the action of the subterraneous fires, shone resplendent by the light of our electric lantern. The mica dust from the shore rising under our feet flew like a cloud of sparks. The bottom now rose sensibly, and we soon arrived at long circuitous slopes, or inclined planes, which took us higher by degrees. But we were obliged to walk carefully among these conglomerates, bound by no cement, the feet slipping on the glassy crystal felspar and quartz. The volcanic nature of this enormous excavation was confirmed on all sides, as I pointed out to my companions. "Picture to yourself," said I, "what this crater must have been when filled with boiling lava, and when the level of the incandescent liquid rose to the orifice of the mountain as though melted on the top of a hot plate." "I can picture it perfectly," said Conseil. "But, sir, will you tell me why the great architect has suspended operations, and how it is that the furnace is replaced by the quiet waters of the lake?" "Most probably, Conseil, because some convulsion beneath the ocean produced that very opening which has served as a passage for the Nautilus. Then the waters of the Atlantic rushed into the interior of the mountain. There must have been a terrible struggle between the two elements, and a struggle which ended in the victory of Neptune. But many ages have run out since then, and the submerged volcano, now a peaceable grotto."
"Very well," replied Ned Land. "I accept the explanation, sir, but in our own interests, I regret that the opening of which you speak was not made above the level of the sea."
But friend Ned," said Conseil, "if the passage had not been under the sea, the Nautilus could not have gone through it." We continued ascending. The steps become more and more perpendicular and narrow. Deep excavations, which we were obliged to cross, cut them here and there. Sloping masses had to be turned. We slid upon our knees and crawled along, but Conseil's dexterity and the Canadian's strength surmounted all obstacles. At a height of about 31 feet, the nature of the ground changed without becoming more practical. To the conglomerate and trachyte succeeded black basalt, the first dispread in layers full of bubbles, the latter forming regular prisms. Placed like a colonnade supporting the spring of the immense vault, an admirable specimen of natural architecture. Between the blocks of basalt wound long streams of lava, long since grown cold, encrusted with bituminous rays, and in some places there were spread very large carpets of sulfur. A more powerful light new battle going up, guys. New battle going up. We are having a hard time getting out of this circle as well, guys, in the marbles race. There's only 4 of us, so the RNG is a little lower. Oh, there's just so many of them. I'm slow rolling, I think. A more powerful light shone through the upper crater, shedding a vague glimmer over these volcanic depressions forever buried in the bosom of this extinguished mountain. But our upward march was soon stopped at a height about 250 feet by impassable obstacles. There is a complete vaulted arch overhanging us, and our ascent was changed to a circular walk. At the last change, vegetable life began to struggle with the mineral. Some shrubs and even some trees grew from the fractures of the walls. I recognized some euphorbias with the caustic sugar coming from them. Heliotropes, quite incapable of justifying their name, sadly drooped their clusters of flowers, both their color and perfume half gone. Here and there some chrysanthemums grew timidly at the foot of an aloe with long, sickly-looking leaves, but between the streams of lava I saw some little violets, still slightly perfumed, and I admit that I smelt them with delight. Perfume is the soul of the flower, and sea flowers have no soul. We had arrived at the foot of some sturdy dragon trees which had pushed aside the rocks with their strong roots when Ned Land exclaimed, "Ah, sir, a hive, a hive!" "A hive?" I replied with gesture of incredibly. "Yes, a hive," replied the Canadian, "and bees humming round it." I approached and was bound to believe my own eyes. There, at a hole bored in one of the dragon trees, were some thousands of the ingenious insects so common in the Canaries and whose produce is so much esteemed. Naturally enough, the Canadian wished to gather the honey, and I could not well oppose his wish. A quantity of dry leaves mixed with sulfur, he lit it with a spark from his flint and began to smoke out the bees. The humming ceased by degrees, and the hive eventually yielded several pounds of the sweetest honey, with which Ned Land filled his haversack. "When I have mixed this honey with the paste of the breadfruit," he said, "I shall be able to offer you a succulent cake." Transcriber's note: breadfruit had been substituted for artocarpus in this edition. "'Pon my word," said Conseil, "it'll be gingerbread." "Never mind the gingerbread," said I. "Let us continue our interesting walk." At every turn of the path we were following, the lake appeared in all its length and breadth. The lantern lit up the whole of its peaceful surface, which knew neither ripple nor wave. The Nautilus remained perfectly immovable. On the platform and on the mountain, the ship's crew were working like black shadows clearly carved against the luminous atmosphere. We were now going round the highest crest of the first layers of rock which upheld the roof. I then saw that bees were not the only representatives of the animal kingdom in the interior of this volcano. Birds of prey hovered here and there in the shadows, or fled from their nests on the top of the rocks. There were sparrowhawks with white breasts and kestrels, and down the slope scampered with their long legs several fine fat bustards. I leave anyone to imagine the covetousness of the Canadian at the sight of this savory game, and whether he did not regret having no gun. But he did his best to replace the lead by stones, and after several fruitless attempts, he succeeded in wounding a magnificent bird. To say that he risked his life 20 times before reaching it is but the truth, but he managed so well that the creature joined the honey cakes in his bag. We were now obliged to descend toward the shore, the crest becoming impracticable. Above us, the crater seemed to gape like the mouth of a well. From this place, the sky could be clearly seen, and clouds, dissipated by the west wind, leaving behind them, even on the summit of the mountain, their misty remnants. Certain proof that they were only moderately high, for the volcano did not rise more than 800 feet above the level of the ocean. Half an hour after the Canadians' last exploit, we had regained the inner shore. Here the flora was represented by large carpets of marine crystal, a little umbelliferous plant very good to pickle, which also bears the name of pierstone and sea fennel. Conseil gathered some bundles of it. As to the fauna, it might be counted by thousands of crustacea of all sorts: lobsters, crabs, spider crabs, chameleons, shrimps, and a large number of shells, rockfish, and limpets. 3/4 of an hour later, we had finished our circuitous walk and were on board. The crew had just finished loading the sodium, and the Nautilus could have left that instant, but Captain Nemo gave no order. Did he wish to wait until night and leave the submarine passage secretly? Perhaps so. Whatever it might be, the next day the Nautilus, having left its port, steered clear of all land at a few yards beneath the waves of the Atlantic. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Sargasso Sea. For those of you who don't know, the Sargasso Sea is the only sea in the world with no land borders. That day, the Nautilus crossed a singular part of the Atlantic Ocean. No one could be ignorant of the existence of a current of warm water known by the Gulf Stream. After leaving the Gulf of Florida, we went in the direction of Spitzbergen. But before entering the Gulf of Mexico, about 45 degrees of north latitude, this current divides into two arms, the principal one going towards the coast of Ireland and Norway, while the second bends to the south around the heights of the Azores, then touching the African shore and describing to a lengthened oval, returns to the Antilles. This second arm, it is rather a collar than an arm, surrounds with its circles of warm water that portion of a cold, quiet, immovable ocean called the Sargasso Sea, a perfect lake in the open Atlantic. It takes no less than 3 years for the great currents to pass around it. Such was the region the Nautilus was now visiting, a perfect meadow, a close carpet of seaweed, fucus, and tropical berries so thick and so compact that the stern of a vessel could hardly tear its way through it. And Captain Nemo, not wishing to entangle his screw in the herbaceous mass, kept some yards beneath the surface of the waves. The name Sargasso comes from the Spanish word sargazo, which signifies kelp. This kelp, or berry plant, is the principal formation of this immense bank. And this is the reason why these plants unite in this peaceful basin of the Atlantic. The only explanation which can be given, he says, seems to me to be the result from the experience known to all the world. Place in a vase some fragments of cork or other floating body and give to the water in the vase a circular movement. The scattered fragments will unite in a group in the center of the liquid surface, that is to say, in the part least agitated. In the phenomena we are considering, the Atlantic is the vase, the Gulf Stream the circular current, and the Sargasso Sea the central point at which the floating bodies unite. I share Maury's opinion, and I was able to study the phenomena in the very midst where vessels rarely penetrate. Above us floated products of all kinds, heaped up among those brownish plants, trunks of trees torn from the Andes of the Rocky Mountains, and floated by the Amazon of the Mississippi numerous wrecks, remains of keels or ship bottoms, side planks stove in, and so weighted with shells and barnacles that they could not rise again to the surface. And time will one day justify Maury's other opinions that these substances thus accumulated for ages will become petrified by the action of the water and will then form inexhaustible coal mines, a precious reserve prepared by far-seeing nature for the moment when men shall have exhausted the mines of the continents. In the midst of this inextricable mass of plants and seaweed, I noticed some charming pink halcyons and actinae, with their long tentacles trailing after them, and medusae, green, red, and blue. All the day of the 22nd of February we passed in the Sargasso Sea, where such fish as are partial to marine plants find abundant nourishment. The next, the ocean had returned to its accustomed aspect. From this time, for 19 days, from the 23rd of February to the 12th of March, the Nautilus kept in the middle of the Atlantic, carrying us at the constant speed of 100 leagues in 24 hours. Captain Nemo evidently intended accomplishing his submarine program, and I imagine that he intended, after doubling Cape Horn, to return to the Australian seas of the Pacific. Ned Land had cause for fear. In these large seas void of islands, we could not attempt to leave the boat, nor had we any means of opposing Captain Nemo's will. Our only course was to submit, but what we could neither gain by force nor cunning, I like to think might be obtained by persuasion. This voyage ended, would he not consent to restore our liberty, under an oath never to reveal his existence? An oath of honor which we should have religiously kept. But we must consider that delicate question with the captain. But was I free to claim this liberty? Had he not himself said from the beginning, in the firmest manner, that the secret of his life exacted from him our lasting imprisonment on board the Nautilus? And would not my 4-month silence appear to him a tacit acceptance of our situation? And would not a return to the subject result in raising suspicions which might be hurtful to our projects, if at some future time a favorable opportunity offered to return to them? During the 19 days mentioned above, no incident of any kind happened to signalize our voyage. I saw little of the captain. He was at work. In the library, I often found his books left open, especially those on natural history. My work on submarine depths, conned over by him, was covered with marginal notes, often contradicting my theories and systems, but the captain contented himself with thus purging my work. It was very rare for him to discuss it with me. Sometimes I heard the melancholy tones of his organ, but only at night, in the midst of the deepest obscurity when the Nautilus slept under the deserted ocean. During this part of our voyage, we sailed whole days on the surface of the waves. The sea seemed abandoned. A few sailing vessels on the road to India were making for the Cape of Good Hope. One day, we were followed by the boats of a whaler who, no doubt, took us for some enormous whale of great price, but Captain Nemo did not wish the worthy fellows to lose their time and trouble, so ended the chase by plunging under the water. Our navigation continued until the 13th of March. That day, the Nautilus was employed in taking surroundings, which greatly interested me. We had then made about 13,000 leagues since our departure from the high seas of the Pacific. The bearings gave us 45 degrees, 37 minutes south latitude, and 37 degrees, 53 minutes west longitude. It was the same water in which Captain Denham of the Herald sounded 7,000 fathoms without finding the bottom. There, too, Lieutenant Parker of the American frigate Congress could not touch the bottom with 15,140 fathoms. Captain Nemo intended seeking the bottom of the ocean by a diagonal sufficiently lengthened by means of lateral plans placed at an angle of 45 degrees with the waterline of the Nautilus. Then, the screw set to work at maximum speed, its four blades beating the waves with an indescribable force. Under this powerful pressure, the hull of the Nautilus quivered like a sonorous chord and sank regularly under the water. At 7,000 fathoms, I saw some blackish tops rising from the midst of the waters, but these summits might belong to the highest mountains like the Himalayas or Mont Blanc, even higher, and the depth of the abyss remained incalculable. The Nautilus descended still lower in spite of the great pressure. I felt the steel plates tremble at the fastenings of the bolts. Its bars bent, its partitions groaned. The windows of the saloon seemed to curve under the pressures of the waters, and this firm structure would doubtless have yielded if, as if the captain had said, it had not been capable of resistance like a solid block. We had attained a depth of 16,000 yards, 4 leagues, and the sides of the Nautilus then bore a pressure of 1,600 atmospheres, that is to say, 3,200 pounds to each square 2/5 of an inch of its surface. "What a situation to be in!" I exclaimed. "To overrun these deep regions where man has never trod. Look, Captain, look at these magnificent rocks, these uninhabited grottos, these lowest receptacles of the globe where life is no longer possible. What unknown sights are here? Why should we be unable to preserve a remembrance of them?"
Would you like to carry away more than a remembrance?
"What do you mean by those words?"
I mean to say that nothing is easier than to make a photographic view of this submarine region.
I had not time to express my surprise at this new proposition when, at Captain Nemo's call, an object was brought into the saloon. Through a widely opened panel, the liquid mass was bright with electricity, which was distributed with such uniformity that not a shadow, not a gradation, was to be seen in our manufactured light. The Nautilus remained motionless, the force of its screw subdued by the inclination of its planes. The instrument was propped on the bottom of the oceanic sight, and in a few seconds we had obtained a perfect negative. But the operation being over, Captain Nemo said,
"Let us go up. We must not abuse our position, nor expose the Nautilus too long to such great pressure."
"Go up again?" I exclaimed.
"Hold well on."
I had not time to understand why the captain cautioned us, then I was thrown forward on the carpet. At a signal from the captain, its screw was shipped, and its blade raised vertically, and the Nautilus shot into air like a balloon, rising with stunning rapidity and cutting the massive waters with a sonorous agitation. Nothing was visible, and in 4 minutes it had shot through the 4 leagues which separated it from the ocean, and after emerging like a flying fish, fell, making the waves rebound to an enormous height. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12. Cachalots and Whales. During the nights of the 13th and 14th of March, the Nautilus returned to its southerly course. I fancied that, when on a level with Cape Horn, he would turn the helm westward in order to beat the Pacific seas and so complete the tour of the world. He did nothing of the kind, but continued on his way to the southern regions. Where was he going to? To the pole? It was madness. I began to think that the captain's temerity justified Ned Land's fears. For some time past, the Canadian had not spoken to me of his projects of flight. He was less communicative, almost silent. I could see that this lengthened imprisonment was weighing upon him, and I felt that rage was burning within him. When he met the captain, his eyes lit up with suppressed anger, and I feared that his natural violence would lead him to some extreme. That day, the 14th of March, Conseil and he came into my room, and I required the cause of their visit.
"A simple question to ask you, sir," replied the Canadian.
"Speak, Ned."
"How many men are there on board the Nautilus, do you think?"
"I cannot tell, my friend."
"I should say that its working does not require a large crew."
"Certainly, under existing conditions, 10 men at the most ought to be enough."
"Well, why should there be any more?"
"Why?" I replied, looking fixedly at Ned Land, whose meaning was easy to guess. "Because," I added, "if my surmises are correct, and if I have well understood the captain's existence, this Nautilus is not only a vessel, it is also a place of refuge for those who, like the commander, have broken every tie upon earth." "Perhaps so," said Conseil, "but in any case, the Nautilus can only attain a certain number of men. Could you not, sir, estimate the maximum?" "How, Conseil?" "By calculation, given the size of the vessel, you know, sir, and consequently the quantity of the air it breathes. Knowing also how much each man expends at a breath, and comparing those results with the fact that the Nautilus is obliged to go to the surface every 24 hours. Conseil had not finished the sentence before I saw what he was driving at. "I understand," said I, "but that calculation, though simple enough, can give a very uncertain result."
"Never mind," said Ned Land urgently.
"Here it is, then. In 1 hour, each man consumes the oxygen contained in 20 gallons of air, and in 24, that contained in 480 gallons. We must therefore find how many times 480 gallons of air the Nautilus contains." "Just so," said Conseil. "Or," I continued, "the size of the Nautilus being 1,500 tons, and 1 ton holding 200 gallons, it contains 300,000 gallons of air, which, divided by 480, gives a quotient of 625, which means to say, strictly speaking, that the air containing in the Nautilus would suffice for 625 men for 24 hours.
625, repeated Ned.
But remember that all of us, passengers, sailors, and officers included, would not form a 10th part of that number." "Still too many for 3 men," murmured Conseil. The Canadian shook his head, passed his hand across his forehead, and left the room without answering. "Will you allow me to make one observation, sir?" said Conseil. "Poor Ned is longing for everything that he can not have. His past life is always present to him. Everything that we are forbidden, he regrets. His head is full of old recollections, and we must understand him. What is he here to do here? Nothing. And he has not learned like you, sir, and has not the same taste for the beauties of the sea that we have. He would risk everything to be able to go once more into a tavern in his own country." Certainly, the monotony on board must seem intolerable to the Canadian, accustomed as he was to a life of liberty and activity. Events were rare which could rouse him to any show of spirit, but that day an event did happen which recalled the bright days of the harpooner. About 11 in the morning, being on the surface of the ocean, the Nautilus fell in with a troop of whales, an encounter which did not astonish me, knowing that these creatures, hunted to death, had taken refuge in high latitudes. We were seated on the platform with a quiet sea. The month of October in those latitudes had gave us some lovely autumnal days. It was the Canadian, he could not be mistaken, who signaled a whale on the eastern horizon. Looking attentively, one might see its black tail rise and fall with the waves 5 miles from the Nautilus.
"Ah," exclaimed Ned Land, "if I was on board a whaler now, such a meeting would give me pleasure. It's one of a large size. See with the strength its blowholes throw up columns of an airstream. Confound it, why am I bound to these steel plates?"
"What, Ned?" said I. "You have not forgotten your old ideas of fishing."
"Can a whale fisher ever forget his old trade, sir? Can he ever tire of the emotions caused by such a chase?"
"You have never fished in these seas, Ned."
"Never, sir. In the northern only, and much in the Bering as in Davis Straits."
"Then the southern whale is still unknown to you. It is the Greenland whale you have hunted up to this time, and that would not risk passing through the warm waters of the equator. Whales are localized according to their kinds in certain seas which they never leave, and if one of those creatures went from Bering to Davis Straits, it must simply because there is a passage from one sea to the other, either on the American or Asiatic side."
"In that case, as I have never fished in these seas, I do not know the kind of whale frequenting them."
"I have told you, Ned."
"A greater reason for making their acquaintance." Look! Look! They approach! They aggravate me! They know that I cannot get at them!"
Ned stamped his feet. His hands trembled, and he grasped an imaginary harpoon.
"Are these cetaceans as large as those of the northern seas?" asked he.
"Very nearly, Ned."
"Because I have seen large whales, sir, whales measuring 100 feet. I have even been told that those of Hullamak and Umgalik of the Aleutian Islands are sometimes 150 feet long."
"That seems to me exaggeration. These creatures are only Baleoprotons, provided with dorsal fins, and, like the cachalots, are generally much smaller than the Greenland whale."
"Ah," exclaimed the Canadian, whose eyes never left the ocean. "They are coming nearer. They're in the same water as the Nautilus."
Then, returning to the conversation, he said,
"You spoke of the cachalot as a small creature. I have heard of gigantic ones. They are intelligent cetacea. It is said of some that they cover themselves with seaweed and fucus, and then are taken for islands. People encamp upon them and settle there. Lights a fire?"
"Builds houses," said Conseil.
"Yes, Joker," said Ned Land, "and one fine day the creature plunges, carrying with it all the inhabitants to the bottom of the sea."
"Something like the travels of Sinbad the Sailor," I replied, laughing.
"Ah!" suddenly exclaimed Ned Land. "It is not one whale. There are 10. There are 20. It's a whole troop. Am I not able to do anything? Hands and feet tied."
"But, friend Ned, why do you not ask Captain Nemo's permission to chase him?" Conseil had not finished his sentence when Ned Land had lowered himself through the panel to speak to the captain. A few minutes afterwards, the two appeared together on the platform. Captain Nemo watched the troop of cetacea playing on the water for about a mile from the Nautilus.
"They are southern whales," said he. "There goes the fortune of a whole fleet of whalers." "Well, sir," asked the Canadian, "can I not chase them, if only to remind me of the old trade of harpooner?" "And to what purpose?" replied Captain Nemo. "Only to destroy? We have nothing to do with the whale oil on board." "But, sir," continued the Canadian, "in the Red Sea you allowed us to follow the Dugong." "Then it was procure fresh meat for my crew. Here it would be killing for killing's sake. I know that is a privilege reserved for man, but I do not approve of such murderous pastime. In destroying the southern whale, like the Greenland whale, an inoffensive creature, your traitors do a culpable action, Master Land. They have already depopulated the whole of Baffin's Bay and are annihilating a class of useful animals. Leave the unfortunate cetacea alone. They have plenty of natural enemies, cachalots, swordfish, and sawfish, without you troubling them."
The captain was right. The barbarous and inconsiderate greed of these fishermen will one day cause the disappearance of the last whale in the ocean. Ned Land whistled Yankee Doodle between his teeth, thrust his hands into his pockets, and turned his back upon us, but Captain Nemo watched the troop of cetacean, and addressing me said,
I was right in saying that the whales had natural enemies enough without counting man. These will have plenty to do before long. Do you see, Monsieur Ahana, about 8 miles to leeward, those blackish moving points?
Yes, Captain, I replied.
Those are cachalots, terrible animals, which I have met in troops of 200 or 300, and to those they are cruel, mischievous creatures. They would be right in exterminating them.
The Canadian turned quickly at the last words.
Well, Captain, said he, it is still time in the interest of the whales. It is useless to expose oneself, Professor. The Nautilus will disperse them. It is armed with a steel spur as good as Master Land's harpoon, I imagine.
The Canadian did not put himself out enough to shrug his shoulders. Attack cetacean with blows of a spur? Who had ever heard of such a thing?
Wait, Monsieur Ahana. We will show you something you have never yet seen. We have no pity for these ferocious creatures. They are nothing but mouth and teeth.
Mouth and teeth. No one could describe the macrocephalus cachalot, which is sometimes more than 75 feet long. Its enormous head occupies 1/3 of its entire body. Better armed than the whale, whose upper jaw is furnished only with whalebone, it is supplied with 25 large tusks about 8 inches long, cylindrical and conical at the top, each weighing 2 pounds. It is the upper part of this enormous head, its great cavities divided by cartilages, that it is found from 600 to 800 pounds of that precious oil called spermaceti. The cachalot is a disagreeable creature, more tadpole than fish, according to Friedol's description. It is badly formed, the whole of its left side being, if we may say it, a failure, and being only able to see with its right eye. But the formidable troop was nearing us. They had seen the whales preparing to attack them. One could judge beforehand that the cachalots would be victorious, not only because they were better built for attack than their inoffensive adversaries, but also because they could remain longer underwater without coming to the surface. There was only just time to go to the help of the whales. The Nautilus went underwater. Conseil, Ned Land, and I took our places before the window in the saloon, and Captain Nemo joined the pilot in his cage to work his apparatus as an engine of destruction. Soon I felt the beatings of the screw quicken and our speed increased. The battle between the cachalots and the whales had already begun when the Nautilus arrived. They did not at first show any fear at the sight of this new monster joining the conflict, but they soon had to guard against its blows. What a battle! The Nautilus was nothing but a formidable harpoon brandished by the hand of its captain. It hurled itself against the fleshy mass, passing through one part to the other, leaving behind it 2 quivering halves of the animal. It could not feel the formidable blows from the tails upon its side, nor the shock which it produced itself much more. One cachalot killed, it ran to the next, tackled on the spot that it might not miss its prey, going forwards and backwards, answering to its helm, and plunging when the cetacean dived into the deep waters, coming up with it when it returned to the surface, striking it front or sideways, cutting or tearing in all directions at any pace, piercing it with its terrible spur. What carnage! What a noise on the surface of the waves! What sharp hissing and what snorting peculiar to these enraged animals! In the midst of these waters, generally so peaceful, their tails made perfect billows. For 1 hour this wholesale massacre continued, from which the cachalots could not escape. Several times 10 or 12 united tried to crush the Nautilus by their weight. From the window, we could see their enormous mouths studded with tusks and their formidable eyes. Ned Land could not contain himself. He threatened and swore at them. We could feel them clinging to our vessel like dogs worrying a wild boar in a copse, but the Nautilus, working its screw, carried them here or there to the upper levels of the ocean without caring for their enormous weight nor the powerful strain on the vessel. At length the mass of cachalots broke up, the waves became quiet, and I felt that we were rising to the surface. The panel opened and we hurried onto the platform. The sea was covered with mutilated bodies. A formidable explosion could not have divided and torn this fleshy mass with more violence. We were floating amid gigantic bodies, bluish on the back and white underneath, covered with enormous protuberances. Some terrified cachalots were flying towards the horizon. The waves were dyed red for several miles, and the Nautilus floated in a sea of blood. Captain Nemo joined us.
"Well, Master Land?" said he.
"Well, sir," replied the Canadian, whose enthusiasm had somewhat calmed.
"It is a terrible spectacle, certainly. But I am not a butcher. I am a hunter, and I call this a butchery." "It is a massacre of mischievous creatures," replied the captain, "and the Nautilus is not a butcher's knife." "I like my harpoon better," said the Canadian. "Every one to his own," answered the captain, looking fixedly at Ned Land. I feared he would commit some act of violence which would end in sad consequences, but his anger was turned by the sight of a whale which the Nautilus had just come up with. The creature had not quite escaped from the cachalot's teeth, and I recognized the southern whale by its flat head, which is entirely black. Anatomically, it is distinguishable from the white whale and the North Cape whale by 7 cervical vertebrae, and it has 2 more ribs than its congeners. The unfortunate cetacean was lying on its side, riddled with holes from the bites and quite dead. From its mutilated fin still hung a young whale which it could not save from the massacre. Its open mouth let the water flow in and out, murmuring like the waves beneath breaking on the shore. Captain Nemo steered close to the corpse of the creature, and 2 of his men mounted its side, and I saw, not without surprise, that they were drawing from its breasts all the milk which they had contained, that is to say, about 2 or 3 tons. The captain offered me a cup of the milk, which was still warm. I could not help showing my repugnance to the drink, but he assured me that it was excellent, and not to be distinguished from cow's milk. I tasted it, and was of his opinion. It was a useful reserve to us, for in the shape of salt butter or cheese, it would form an agreeable variety from our ordinary food. From that day, I noticed with uneasiness that Ned Land's ill will towards Captain Nemo increased, and I resolved to watch the Canadian's gestures closely. End of chapter 12. I'm going to use the restroom very quickly. BRBs.
right, let's get back into it. Chapter 13. The Iceberg. The Nautilus was steadily pursuing its southerly course, following the 50th meridian with considerable speed. Did he wish to reach the pole? I did not think so, for every attempt to reach that point had hitherto failed. Again, the season was far advanced, for in the Antarctic regions, the 13th of March corresponds with the 13th of September of northern regions, which begin at the equinoctial season. On the 14th of March, I saw floating ice in latitude 55 degrees, merely pale bits of debris from 20 to 25 feet long, forming banks over which the sea curled. The Nautilus remained on the surface of the ocean. Ned Land, who had fished in the Arctic seas, was familiar with its icebergs, but Conseil and I admired them for the first time. In the atmosphere towards the southern horizon stretched a white, dazzling band. English whalers had given it to the name of ice blink. However thick the clouds may be, it was always visible, and announces the presence of an ice peak or bank. Accordingly, large blocks soon appeared whose brilliancy changed with the caprices of the fog. Some of those masses showed green veins as if long undulating lines had been traced with sulfate of copper. Others resembled enormous amethysts with the lights shining through them. Some reflected the light of day upon 1,000 crystal facets. Others, shaded with vivid calcareous reflections, resembled a perfect town of marble. The more we neared the south, the more these floating islands increased both in number and importance. At 60 degrees latitude, every pass had disappeared. But, seeking carefully, Captain Nemo soon found a narrow opening through which he boldly slipped, knowing, however, that it would close behind him. Thus, guided by his clever hand, the Nautilus passed through all the ice with the precision which quite charmed Conseil. Icebergs or mountains, ice fields or smooth plains seeming to have no limits, drift ice or floating ice packs, plains broken up, called palks when they are circular, and streams when they are made up of long strips. The temperature was very low. Thermometer exposed to the air marked 2 degrees or 3 degrees below zero, but we were warmly clad with fur, at the expense of the sea bear or seal. The interior of the Nautilus, warmed regularly by its electrical apparatus, defied the most intense cold. Besides, it would only have been necessary to go south some yards beneath the waves to find a more bearable temperature. 2 months earlier, we should have been perpetual daylight in these latitudes, but already we had 3 or 4 hours of night, and by there would be 6 months of darkness in these circumpolar regions. On the 5th of March, we were in the latitude of New Shetland or South Orkney. The captain told me that formerly numerous tribes of seals inhabited them, but that English and American whalers, in their rage for destruction, massacred both old and young. Thus, where there was once life and animation, they had left silence and death. About 8 o'clock on the morning of the 16th of March, the Nautilus, following the 55th meridian, cut the Antarctic polar circle. Ice surrounded us on all sides and closed the horizon, but Captain Nemo went from one opening to another, still going higher. I cannot express my astonishment at the beauties of these new regions. The ice took most surprising forms. Here the grouping formed an oriental town with innumerable mosques and minarets. There a fallen city thrown to the earth, as it were, by some convulsion of nature. The whole aspect was constantly changed by the oblique rays of the sun, or lost in the grayish fog amidst hurricanes of snow. Detonations and falls were heard on all sides, great overthrows of icebergs which altered the whole landscape like a diorama. Often seeing no exit, I thought we were definitely prisoners, but instinct guiding him at the slightest indication, Captain Nemo would discover a new pass. He was never mistaken when he saw the thin threads of bluish water trickling along the ice fields, and I had no doubt that he had already ventured into the midst of these Antarctic seas before. On the 16th of March, however, the ice fields absolutely blocked our road. It was not the iceberg itself as yet, but vast fields cemented by the cold. But this obstacle could not stop Captain Nemo. He hurled himself against it with frightful violence. The Nautilus entered the brittle mass like a wedge and split it with frightful crackings. It was the battering ram of the ancients hurled by infinite strength. The ice, thrown high in the air, fell like hail around us. By its own power of impulsion, our apparatus made a canal for itself. Sometimes carried away by its own impetus, it lodged on the ice field, crushing it with its weight, and sometimes buried beneath it, dividing it by a simple pitching movement, producing large rents in it. Violent gales assailed us at this time, accompanied by thick fogs through which, from one end of the platform to the other, we could see nothing. The wind blew sharply from all parts of the compass, and the snow lay in such hard heaps that we had to break it with blows of a pickaxe. The temperature was always at 5 degrees below zero, every outward part of the Nautilus covered with ice. A rigged vessel would have been entangled in the blocked-up gorges. A vessel without sails, with electricity for its motive power and wanting no coal, could alone brave such high latitudes. At length, on the 18th of March, after many useless assaults, the Nautilus was positively blocked. It was no longer either streams, packs, or ice fields, but an interminable and immovable barrier formed by mountains soldered together. "An iceberg," said the Canadian to me. I knew that, to Ned Land, as well as to other navigators who preceded us, this was an inevitable obstacle. The sun appearing for an instant at noon, Captain Nemo took an observation as near as possible, which gave our situation at 51 degrees 30 minutes longitude and 67 degrees 39 minutes of south latitude. We had advanced 1 degree more in this Antarctic region. Of the liquid surface of the sea there was no longer a glimpse. Under the spur of the Nautilus lay stretched a vast plain, entangled with confused blocks. Here and there, sharp points and slender needles rising to the height of 200 feet. Further on, a steep shore, hewn as it were with an axe and clothed with grayish tints, huge mirrors reflecting a few rays of sunshine, half drowned in the fog. And over this desolate face of nature a stern silence reigned, scarcely broken by the flapping of the wings of petrels and puffins. Everything was frozen, even the noise. The Nautilus was then obliged to stop in its adventurous course amid these fields of ice. In spite of our efforts, in spite of the powerful means employed to break the ice, the Nautilus remained immovable. Generally, when we can proceed no further, we have return still upon us, but here return was impossible as advance, for every pass had closed behind us, and for a few moments when we were stationary, we were likely to be entirely blocked, which did indeed happen about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the fresh ice forming around its sides with astonishing rapidity. I was obliged to admit that Captain Nemo was more than imprudent. I was on the platform at that moment, and the captain had been observing our situation for some time past when he said to me,
"Well, sir, what do you think of this?"
"I think we are caught, Captain."
"So, Monsieur Ahana, you really think that the Nautilus cannot disengage itself?"
"With difficulty, Captain, for the season is already too far advanced for you to reckon on breaking of the ice."
"Ah, sir,"
said Captain Nemo in an ironical tone,
"you will always be the same. You see nothing but difficulties and obstacles. I can affirm that not only the Nautilus disengage itself, but also it can go further still."
"Further to the south?" I asked, looking at the captain.
"Yes, sir. It shall go to the pole."
"To the pole!" I exclaimed, unable to repress a gesture of incredulity.
"Yes," replied the captain coldly, "to the Antarctic pole, to that unknown point of whence springs every meridian of the globe. You know whether I can do as I please with the Nautilus."
Yes, I knew that. I knew that this man was bold, even to rashness, but to conquer those obstacles which bristled around the South Pole, rendering it more inaccessible than the North, which had not yet been reached by the boldest navigators. Was it not a mad enterprise only which a maniac would have conceived? It then came into my head to ask Captain Nemo if he had ever discovered that pole which had yet been, never yet been trodden by a human creature.
"No, sir," he replied, "but we will discover it together. Where others have failed, I will not fail. I have never yet let my Nautilus so far into the southern seas, but I repeat, it shall go further yet. I can well believe you, Captain, said I, in a slightly ironical tone. I believe you. Let us go ahead. There are no obstacles for us. Let us smash this iceberg. Let us blow it up, and if it resists, let's give the Nautilus wings to fly over it. Over it, sir, said Captain Nemo quietly. No, not over it, but under it. Under it? I exclaimed, a sudden idea of the captain's projects flashing upon my mind. I understood. The wonderful qualities of the Nautilus were going to serve us in this superhuman enterprise. I see we are beginning to understand one another, sir, said the captain, half smiling. You begin to see the possibility, I should say the success, of this attempt. That which is impossible for an ordinary vessel is easy to the Nautilus. If a continent lies before the pole, it must stop before the continent. But if, on the contrary, the pole is washed by open sea, it will go even to the pole. Certainly, said I, carried away by the captain's reasoning. If the surface of the sea is solidified by the ice, the lower depths are free by the providential law which has placed the maximum of density of the waters of the ocean 1 degree higher than freezing point, and, if I am not mistaken, the portion of this iceberg which is above the water is as 1 to 4 to that which is below. Very nearly, sir. For 1 foot of iceberg above the sea, there are 3 below it. If these ice mountains are not more than 300 feet above the surface, they are not more than 900 beneath. And what are 900 feet to the Nautilus? Nothing, sir. It could even seek a greater depths than the uniform temperature of seawater, and there brave with impunity the 30 or 40 degrees of surface cold. Just so, sir, just so, I replied, getting animated. The only difficulty, continued Captain Nemo, is that of remaining several days without renewing our provision of air. Is that all? The Nautilus has vast reservoirs. We can fill them, and they will supply us with all the oxygen we want. Well thought of, Monsieur Ahana, replied the captain, smiling, but not wishing you to accuse me of rashness, I will first give you all my objections. Have you any more to make? Only one. It is possible, if the sea exists at the South Pole, that it may be covered, and consequently we shall be unable to come to the surface. Good sir, but do you not forget the Nautilus is armed with a powerful spur, and we could send it diagonally against these fields of ice which would open at the shocks. Ah, sir, you are full of ideas today. Besides, Captain, I added, enthusiastically, Snooze Button TV. Welcome in, guys. Welcome in. How are we today? Sorry, we turned off even the raid thing today. Welcome in, Snooze. Books. Welcome in, guys. Snooze Button TV. We really like Snooze Button TV. It's a good channel. It's a great channel, guys. Get on over there, do yourselves a favor, and hit the follow button. Great games, great content, great reading. You know, do the things. How was stream today? How are we? Did we have a fun time? Yay for some more Jules Verne. Yeah, we're going to finish next week. It's exciting. Then we will have no stream on July 4th. So we're going to be starting the week after. What about you, though? Tell us about stream. Welcome in, readers. Yeah. Because we are cruising right now. I don't know what happened today. I got like the ants in my pants. I'm reading fast. Continuing our 2 stories, making good progress on both. Nice. Thankfully, could read longer today. No wildfires tickling my throat. Oh, man, yeah. It's nice to have a break from that, I am sure. Well, thanks for thinking of us again.
We love the snooze button. We're really happy that you bring your people here. So, guys, go do the things. Go hang out. I'd love to hear more lovely reading. Yeah. We are currently making our way towards the South Pole. Currently making our way to the South Pole. So right now, Captain Nemo and Monsieur Ahana are chatting because they're stuck in ice, and he was saying we're stuck, and then Captain Nemo's like, really? Come on. So they're talking about, they're doing the thought experiment before they move about how to get there and what to do when they get there. Right now they're talking about the air. But yeah, we had coming into today, we had 87 pages left to go, and we are already through 30 today. I mean, like, I don't know what happened. I'm just got the zoomies. There was some exciting stuff, though. We saw Atlantis today, Yeah, so we're gonna get back to it because I'm on a roll. But guys, go follow Snooze Button. And thank you so much. So let's get back to it here. I don't think I wouldn't say I modeled it after, but I was really I was sent there by Proto League, and I had rated Snooze Button a long time ago once, I believe, and and I know of the family Amp as well, and Proto League was like, oh, you're going to start doing reading streams, because I announced it when Proto was in here, and he's like, Snooze Button does reading streams all the time, and so I reacquainted myself, and I'm all the happier for it. I am all the happier for it. I love that you say that, Snooze. I love hearing your voice. Your voice is great. All right, let's get back to it. Everybody get comfy. We're in the middle of dialogue, so we're gonna have. I'm not sure I love the voices I chose for these guys, but we're pot committed at this point. So as of right now, we do have a vote in the Discord for our next book, and The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is in the lead. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is in the lead by 4 votes, and we got about 3 more days to vote on that. Well, this weekend sometime. Sometimes you make a choice, right? Like I said, I had this whole thing, like, I've never practiced a voice before. I have never practiced a voice before for reading, and the week before, I was in the car, and I was like, all right, I've got Baron Nemo's voice, and I've got Professor Ahana's. I was like, we'll figure out Ned Land and Conseil. Whatever. Whatever happens, whatever strikes me. But I've got these 2 character voices, because they're going to be doing the most talking, I'm pretty sure. And then I started reading, and neither of those voices came out. So I was sitting there in the car like, this is Baron Nemo, this is Captain Nemo, this is Captain Nemo, this is Captain, and then I got here, and that was not Captain Nemo. I was like, well, whatever, all right. So all right, let's get back to it, guys.
Ah, sir, you are full of ideas today.
Besides, Captain, I added enthusiastically, why should we not find the sea open at the South Pole as well as the North? The frozen poles of the Earth do not coincide either in the southern or in the northern regions, and, until it is proved to the contrary, we may suppose either a continent or an ocean free from ice at these 2 points of the globe.
I think so too, Monsieur Ahana, replied Captain Nemo. I only wish you to observe that, after having made so many objections to my project, you are now crushing me with arguments in its favor.
The preparations for this audacious attempt now began. The powerful pumps of the Nautilus were working air into the reservoirs and storing it at high pressure. About 4 o'clock, Captain Nemo announced the closing of the panels of the platform. I threw one last look at the massive iceberg which we were going to cross. The weather was clear, the atmosphere pure enough, the cold very great, being 12 degrees below zero, but the wind having gone down, this temperature was not so unbearable. About 10 men mounted the sides of the Nautilus, armed with pickaxes to break the ice around the vessel, which was soon free. The operation was quickly performed, for the fresh ice was still very thin. We all went below. The usual reservoirs were filled with the newly liberated water, and the Nautilus soon descended. I had taken my place with Conseil in the saloon. Through the open window we could see the lower beds of the Southern Ocean. The thermometer went up, the needle of the compass deviated on the dial. At about 900 feet, as Captain Nemo had foreseen, we were floating beneath the undulating bottoms of the iceberg. But the Nautilus went lower still. It went to the depth of 400 fathoms. The temperature of the water at the surface showed 12 degrees. It was now only 10. We had gained 2. I need not say the temperature of the Nautilus was raised by its heating apparatus to a much higher degree. Every maneuver was accomplished with wonderful precision. "We shall pass it, if you please, sir," said Conseil. "I believe we shall," I said, in a tone of firm conviction. In the open sea, the Nautilus had taken its course direct to the pole without leaving the 52nd meridian. From 67 degrees 30 minutes to 90 degrees 22 degrees and a half of longitude remained to travel, that is, about 500 leagues. The Nautilus kept up a mean speed of 26 miles per hour, the speed of an express train. If that was kept up, in 40 hours we should reach the pole. For a part of the night, the novelty of the situation kept us at the window. The sea was lit with the electric lantern, but it was deserted. Fishes did not sojourn in these imprisoned waters. They only found their passage to take them from the Antarctic Ocean to the open polar sea. Our pace was rapid. We could feel it by the quivering of the long steel body. About 2 in the morning, I took some hours' repose, and Conseil did the same. In crossing the waist, I did not meet Captain Nemo. I supposed him to be in the pilot's cage. The next morning, 19th of March, I took my post once more in the saloon. The electric log told me that the speed of the Nautilus had been slackened. It was then going towards the surface, but prudently emptying its reservoirs very slowly. My heart beat fast. Were we going to emerge and regain the open polar atmosphere? No. A shock told me the Nautilus had struck the bottom of the iceberg, still very thick, judging from the deadened sound. We had indeed struck, to use a sea expression, but in an inverse sea and at 1,000 feet deep. This would give 3,000 feet of ice above us, 1,000 being above the watermark. The iceberg was then higher than at its borders, not a very reassuring fact. Several times the day that Nautilus tried again, and every time it struck the wall which lay like a ceiling above it. Sometimes it met with 900 yards, only 200 of which arose above the surface. It was twice the height when the Nautilus had gone under the waves. I carefully noted the different depths and thus obtained a submarine profile of the chain as it was developed under the water. That night no change had taken place in our situation, still ice between 400 and 500 yards in depth. It was evidently diminishing, but still, what a thickness between us and the surface of the ocean. It was then 8. According to the daily custom on board the Nautilus, its air should have been renewed 4 hours ago. But I did not suffer much, although Captain Nemo had not yet made any demand upon his reserve of oxygen. My sleep was painful that night. Hope and fear besieged me by turns. I rose several times, and the groping of the Nautilus continued. About 3 in the morning, I noticed that the lower surface of the iceberg was only about 50 feet deep. 150 feet now separated us from the surface of the waters. The iceberg was by degrees becoming an ice field, the mountain a plain. My eyes never left the manometer. We were still rising diagonally to the surface, which sparkled under the electric rays. The iceberg was stretching both above and beneath into lengthening slopes, and mile after mile it was getting thinner. At length, at 6 in the morning on the memorable day, the 19th of March, the door of the saloon opened and Captain Nemo appeared.
"The sea is open,"
was all he said. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14, The South Pole. I rushed onto the platform, yes, to the open sea, with but a few scattered pieces of ice and moving icebergs, a long stretch of sea, a world of birds in the air, and myriads of fish under those waters which varied from intense blue to olive green according to the bottom. The thermometer marked 3 degrees Celsius above zero. It was comparatively spring, shut up as we were behind this iceberg whose lengthened mass was dimly seen on our northern horizon. "Are we at the pole?" I asked Captain with a beating heart.
"I do not know," he replied. "At noon I will take our bearings."
"But will the sun show itself through this fog?" I asked with a leaden sky.
"However little shows, it will be enough," replied the captain.
About 10 miles south, a solitary island rose to the height of 104 yards. We made for it, but carefully, for the sea might be strewn with banks. 1 hour afterwards, we had reached it. 2 hours later, we had made the round of it. It measured 4 or 5 miles in circumference. A narrow canal separated it from a considerable stretch of land, perhaps a continent, for we could not see its limits. The existence of this land seemed to give some color to Maury's theory. The ingenious American has remarked that between the South Pole and the 60th parallel, the sea is covered with floating ice of enormous size which is never met with in the North Atlantic. From this fact, he has drawn the conclusion that the Antarctic Circle encloses considerable continents, as icebergs cannot form in open sea but only on the coasts. According to these calculations, the mass of ice surrounding the southern pole forms a vast cap, the circumference of which must be at least 2,500 miles, but the Nautilus, for fear of running aground, had stopped about 3 cable lengths from a strand over which reared a superb heap of rocks. The boat was launched. The captain, 2 of his men bearing instruments, Conseil, and myself were in it. It was 10 in the morning. I had not seen Ned Land. Doubtless the Canadian did not wish to appear in the presence of the South Pole. A few strokes of the oar brought us to the sand where we ran ashore. Conseil was going to jump on the land when I held him back. "Sir," said I to Captain Nemo, "to you belongs the honor of first setting foot on this land."
"Yes, sir," said the captain, "and if I do not hesitate to tread the South Pole, it is because up to this time no human being has left a trace here."
Saying this, he jumped lightly onto the sand. His heart beat with emotion. He climbed a rock sloping to a little promontory, and there, with his arms crossed, mute and motionless, and with an eager look, he seemed to take possession of these southern regions. After 5 minutes passed in this ecstasy, he turned to us.
"When you like, sir."
I landed, followed by Conseil, leaving the 2 men in the boat. For a long way, the soil was composed of a reddish sandy stone, something like a crushed brick, scoriae, streams of lava, and pumice stones. One could not mistake its volcanic origin. In some parts, slight curls of smoke emitted a sulphurous smell, proving that the internal fires had lost nothing of their expansive powers, though, having climbed to high acclivity, I could see no volcano for a radius of several miles. We know that in those Antarctic countries, James Ross found 2 craters, the Erebus and Terror, in full activity on the 167th meridian, latitude 77 degrees 32 minutes. The vegetation of this desolate continent seemed to me much restricted. Some lichens lay upon the black rock, some microscopic plants, rudimentary diatomas, and a kind of cells placed between 2 quartz shells, long purple and scarlet weed, supported on little swimming bladders which the breaking of the waves brought to the shore. These constituted the meager flora of this region. The shore was strewn with mollusks, little mussels, and limpets. I also saw myriads of northern Cleos, 1¼ inch longs, of which a whale would swallow a whole world at a mouthful, and some perfect sea butterflies animating the waters on the skirts of the shore. There appeared on the high bottoms some coral shrubs of the kind which, according to James Ross, live in the Antarctic seas to the depth of more than 1,000 yards. Then there were little kingfishers and starfish studding the soil. But where life abounded most was in the air. There thousands of birds fluttered and flew of all kinds, deafening us with their cries. Others crowded the rock, looking at us as we passed by without fear, and pressing familiarly close by our feet. There were penguins so agile in the water, heavy and awkward as they are on the ground, they were uttering harsh cries, a large assembly sober in gesture, but extravagant in clamor. Albatrosses passed in the air, the expanse of their wings being at least 4 yards and a half, and justly called the vultures of the ocean. Some gigantic petrels and some damiers, a kind of small duck, the underpart of whose body is black and white. And then there were a whole series of petrels, some whitish with brown bordered wings, others blue, peculiar to the Antarctic seas, and so oily, as I told Conseil, that the inhabitants of the Faroe Islands had nothing to do before lighting them but to put a wick in. A little more, Conseil, and they would be perfect lamps. After that, we cannot expect nature to have previously furnished them with wicks. About half a mile further on, the soil was riddled with ruff's nests, a sort of laying ground out of which many birds were issuing. Captain Nemo had some hundreds hunted. They uttered a cry like the braying of an ass, were about the size of a goose, slate color on their body, white beneath, with a yellow line around their throats. They allowed themselves to be killed with a stone, never trying to escape. But the fog did not lift, and 11 the sun had not yet shown itself. Its absence made me uneasy. Without it, no observations were possible. How then could we decide whether we had reached the pole? When I rejoined Captain Nemo, I found him leaning on a piece of rock, silently watching the sky. He seemed impatient and vexed, but what was to be done? This rash and powerful man could not command the sun as he did the sea. Noon arrived without the orb of day showing itself for an instant. We could not even tell its position behind the curtain of fog as soon as the fog turned to snow. "Till tomorrow," said the captain quietly, and we returned to the Nautilus amid these atmospheric disturbances. The tempest of snow continued till the next day. It was impossible to remain on the platform. From the saloon, where I was taking notes of incidents happening during this excursion to the polar continent, I could hear the cries of petrels and albatrosses sporting in the midst of this violent storm. The Nautilus did not remain motionless, but skirted the coast, advancing 10 miles more to the south, in the half-light left by the sun as it skirted the edge of the horizon. The next day, 20th of March, the snow had... The 20th of March, the snow had ceased. The cold was a little greater, thermometer showing 2 below zero. The fog was rising, and I hoped that that day our observations might be taken. Captain Nemo not having yet appeared, the boat took Conseil and myself to land. The soil was still of the same volcanic nature. Everywhere were traces of lava, scoriae, and basalt, but the crater which had vomited them I could not see. Here, as lower down, this continent was alive with myriads of birds, but their rule was now divided with large troops of sea mammals, looking at us with their soft eyes. There were several kinds of seals, some stretched on the earth, some on flakes of ice, many going in and out of the sea. They did not flee at our approach, never having had anything to do with man, and I reckoned that there were provisions there for hundreds of vessels. "Sir," said Conseil, "will you tell me the names of these creatures?" "They are seals and morses." It was now 8 in the morning. 4 hours remained to us before the sun could be observed with advantage. I directed our steps towards a vast bay cut in the steep granite shore. There, I can aver that earth and ice were lost to sight by the numbers of sea mammals covering them, and I involuntarily sought for old Proteus, the mythological shepherd who watched these immense flocks of Neptune. There were more seals than anything else, forming distinct groups, male and female, the father watching over his family, the mother suckling her little ones, some already strong enough to go on a few steps. When they wished to change their place, they took little jumps made by the contraction of their bodies and helped awkwardly enough by their imperfect fin, which, as with Lamentin, their cousins, forms a perfect forearm. I would say that in the water, which is their element, the spine of these creatures is flexible. With smooth and close skin and webbed feet, they swim admirably. In resting on the earth, they take the most graceful attitudes. Thus the ancients, observing their soft and expressive looks, which cannot be surpassed by the most beautiful look a woman can give, their clear, voluptuous eyes, their charming positions, and the poetry of their manners, metamorphosed them, the male into a Triton and the female into a mermaid. I made Conseil notice the considerable development of the lobes of the brain in these interesting cetaceans. No mammal except man has such a quantity of brain matter. They are also capable of receiving a certain amount of education, are easily domesticated, and I think, with other naturalists, that if properly taught, they would be of great service as fishing dogs. The greater part of them slept on the rocks or on sand. Amongst these seals, properly so called, which have no external ears, in which they differ from the otter, whose ears are prominent, I noticed several varieties of seals about 3 yards long, with a white coat, bulldog heads armed with teeth in both jaws, 4 incisors at the top, 4 at the bottom, and 2 large canine teeth in the shape of a fleur-de-lis. Amongst them, gilded sea elephants, a kind of seal with short, flexible trunks. The giants of this species measured 20 feet round and 10 yards and a half in length, but they did not move as we approached. "Oh, these creatures are not dangerous?" asked Conseil. "No, not unless you attack them. When they have to defend their young, their rage is terrible, and it is not uncommon for them to break the fishing boat to pieces." "They are quite right," said Conseil. "I do not say they are not." 2 miles further on, we were stopped by the promontory which shelters the bay from the southerly winds. Beyond it, we heard loud bellowing such as a troop of ruminants would produce. "Good," said Conseil. "A concert of bulls." "No, a concert of morses." "They are fighting." "They are either fighting or playing." We now began to climb the blackish rocks amid unforeseen stumbles and over stones which the ice made slippery. More than once I rolled over at the expense of my loins. Conseil, more prudent or more steady, did not stumble and helped me up, saying, "If, sir, you would have the kindness to take wider steps, you would preserve your equilibrium better." Arrived at the upper ridge of the promontory, I saw a vast white plain covered with morses. They were playing amongst themselves, and what we heard were bellowings of pleasure, not of anger. As I passed these curious animals, I could examine them leisurely, for they did not move. Their skins were thick and rugged, of a yellowish tint, approaching to red. Their hair short and scant. Some of them were 4 yards and a quarter long. Quieter and less timid than their cousins of the north, they did not, like them, place sentinels around the outskirts of their encampment. After examining the city of Morses, I began to think of returning. It was 11 o'clock, and if Captain Nemo found the conditions favorable for observations, I wished to be present at the operation. We followed a narrow pathway running along the summit of the steep shore. At 11:30, we had reached the place where we landed. The boat had run aground, bringing the captain. I saw him standing on a block of basalt, his instruments near him, his eyes fixed on the northern horizon, near which the sun was then describing a lengthened curve. I took my place beside him and waited without speaking. Noon arrived, and, as before, the sun did not appear. It was a fatality. Observations were still wanting. If not accomplished tomorrow, we must give up the idea of taking any. We were indeed exactly at the 20th of March. Tomorrow, the 21st, would be the equinox. The sun would disappear behind the horizon for 6 months, and with its disappearance, the long polar night would begin. Since the September equinox, it had emerged from the northern horizon, rising by lengthened spirals up to the 21st of December. At this period, the summer solstice of the northern regions, it had begun to descend, and tomorrow was to shed its last rays upon them. I communicated my fears and observations to Captain Nemo.
You are right, Monsieur Ahona, said he. If tomorrow I cannot take the altitude of the sun, I shall not be able to do it for 6 months, but precisely because chance has led me into these seas on the 21st of March. My bearings will be easy to take if at 12 we can see the sun.
Why, Captain?
Because then the orb of day described such lengthened curves that it is difficult to measure exactly its height above the horizon, and grave errors may be made with instruments.
What will you do then?
I shall use only my chronometer, replied Captain Nemo. If tomorrow, the 21st of March, the disk of the sun, allowing for refraction, is exactly cut by the northern horizon, it will show that I am at the South Pole.
Just so, said I. But this statement is not mathematically correct, because the equinox does not necessarily begin at noon.
Very likely, sir, but the air will not be 100 yards, and we do not want more. Till tomorrow, then.
Captain Nemo returned on board. Conseil and I remained to survey the shore, observing and studying until 5 o'clock. Then I went to bed, not, however, without invoking, like the Indian, the favor of the radiant orb. The next day, the 21st of March, at 5 in the morning, I mounted the platform. I found Captain Nemo there.
The weather is lightening a little, said he. I have some hope. After breakfast, we will go on shore and choose a post for observation.
That point settled, I sought Ned Land. I wanted to take him with me, but the obstinate Canadian refused, and I saw that his taciturnity and his bad humor grew day by day. After all, I was not sorry for his obstinacy under the circumstances. Indeed, there were too many seals on shore, and we ought not to lay such temptation in this unreflecting fisherman's way. Breakfast over, we went on shore. The Nautilus had gone some miles further up in the night, and it was a whole league from the coast, above which reared a sharp peak about 500 yards high. The boat took with me Captain Nemo, 2 men and the crew, and the instruments, which consisted of a chronometer, a telescope, and a barometer. While crossing, I saw numerous whales, beginning to the 3 kinds peculiar to the southern seas. The whale, or the English right whale, which has no dorsal fin, the humpback, with reeved chest and large whitish fins, which, in spite of its name, do not form wings, and the finback, of a yellowish-brown, the liveliest of all the cetacea. This powerful creature is heard a long way off when he throws to great heights columns of air and vapor which look like whirlwinds of smoke. These different mammals were disporting themselves in troops and in quiet waters, and I could see that this basin of the Antarctic Pole serves as a place of refuge to the cetacea too closely tracked by the hunters. I also noticed large medusae floating beneath the reeds. At 9 we landed. The sky was brightening. The clouds were flying to the south, and the fog seemed to be leaving the cold surface of the waters. Captain Nemo went towards the peak, which he doubtless meant to be his observatory. It was a painful ascent over the sharp lava and pumice stones, in an atmosphere often impregnated with a sulphurous smell from the smoking cracks. For a man unaccustomed to walk on land, the captain climbed the steep slopes with an agility I never saw equaled, and which a hunter would have envied. We were 2 hours getting to the summit of this peak, which was half porphyry and half basalt. From thence we looked upon a vast sea which, towards the north, distinctly traced its boundary line upon the sky. At our feet lay fields of dazzling whiteness. Over our heads a pale azure, free from fog, To the north, the disk of the sun seemed like a ball of fire, already horned by the cutting of the horizon. From the bosom of the water rose sheaves of liquid jets by hundreds. In the distance lay the Nautilus like a cetacean asleep on the water. Behind us, to the south and east, an immense country and a chaotic heap of rocks and ice, the limits of which were not visible. On arriving at the summit, Captain Nemo carefully took the mean height of the barometer, for he would have to consider that in taking his observations. At 11:45, the sun, then seen only by refraction, looked like a golden disk shedding its last rays upon this deserted continent and seas which never man had yet plowed. Captain Nemo, furnished with a lenticular glass which, by means of a mirror, corrected the refraction, watched the orb sinking below the horizon by degrees, following a lengthened diagonal. I held the chronometer. My heart beat fast. If the disappearance of the half disk of the sun coincided with 12 o'clock on the chronometer, we were at the pole itself. 12! I exclaimed.
The South Pole, replied Captain Nemo in a grave voice,
handing me the glass which showed the orb cut in exactly equal parts by the horizon. I looked at the last rays crowning the peak and the shadows mounting by degrees up its slopes. At that moment, Captain Nemo, resting with his hand on my shoulder, said,
I, Captain Nemo, on the 21st day of March 1868, have reached the South Pole of the 90th degree, and I take possession of this part of the globe equal to 1/6 of the known continents.
In whose name, Captain?
In my own, sir.
Saying which, Captain Nemo unfurled a black banner bearing an N in gold quartered on its bunting. Then, turning towards the orb of day, whose last rays lapped the horizon of the sea, he exclaimed,
Adieu, sun! Disappear, thou radiant orb! Rest beneath this open sea, and let a night of 6 months spread its shadow over my new domains.
End of chapter 13. Let's start 14. All right. So we've got just a little bit more to go. I think this next chapter might be the last one. Depending upon how long it is, I think this will be the last chapter for the evening. We were picking up steam. We were going really fast. We slowed down a bit. But we're still on track to make this, finish this one, and then next week we will finish the book. All things willing. Chapter 15. Accident or Incident. The next day, the 22nd of March, at 6 in the morning, preparations for departure were begun. The last gleams of twilight were melting into night. The cold was great. The constellations shone with wonderful intensity. In the zenith glittered that wondrous Southern Cross, the polar bear of Antarctic regions. The thermometer showed 120 below zero, and when the wind freshened, it was most biting. Flakes of ice increased on the open water. The sea seemed everywhere alike. Numerous blackish patches spread on the surface, showing the formation of fresh ice. Evidently, the southern basin, frozen during the 6 winter months, was absolutely inaccessible. What became of the whales in that time? Doubtless they went beneath the icebergs, seeking more practical seas. As to the seals and morses, accustomed to live in a hard climate, they remained on these icy shores. These creatures have the instinct to break holes in the icy field and to keep them open. To these holes they come for breath. When the birds, driven away by the cold, have immigrated to the north, these sea mammals remain sole masters of the polar continent. But the reservoirs were filling with water, and the Nautilus was slowly descending. At 1,000 feet deep, it stopped. Its screw beat the waves, and it advanced straight towards the north at a speed of 15 miles an hour. Towards night, it was already floating under the immense body of the iceberg. At 3 in the morning, I was awakened by a violent shock. I sat up in my bed and listened in the darkness when I was thrown into the middle of the room. The Nautilus, after having struck, had rebounded violently. I groped along the partition and by the staircase to the saloon, which was lit by the luminous ceiling. The furniture was upset. Fortunately, the windows were firmly set and had held fast. The pictures on the starboard side, from being no longer vertical, were clinging to the paper, whilst those of the port side were hanging at least a foot from the wall. The Nautilus was lying on its starboard side perfectly motionless. I heard footsteps, a confusion of voices, but Captain Nemo did not appear. As I was leaving the saloon, Ned Land and Conseil entered. "What is the matter?" said I at once. "I came to ask you, sir," replied Conseil.
Confound it, exclaimed the Canadian. I know well enough. The Nautilus has struck, and judging by the way she lies, I do not think she will right herself as she did the first time in Torres Straits.
"But," I asked, "has she at least come to the surface of the sea?" "We do not know," replied Conseil. "It is easy to decide," I answered. I consulted the manometer. To my great surprise, it showed a depth of more than 180 fathoms. "What does that mean?" I exclaimed. "Oh, must ask Captain Nemo," said Conseil.
But where shall we find him? Said Ned Land.
"Follow me," said I to my companions. We left the saloon. There was no one in the library. At the center staircase, by the berths of the ship's crew, there was no one. I thought that the Captain Nemo must be in the pilot's cage. It was best to wait. We all returned to the saloon, and for 20 minutes we remained thus, trying to hear the slightest noise which might be made on board the Nautilus, when Captain Nemo entered. He seemed not to see us. His face, generally so impassive, showed signs of uneasiness. He watched the compass silently and the manometer, and going to the planisphere, placed his finger on a spot representing the southern seas. I would not interrupt him, but some minutes later, when he turned towards me, I said, using one of his own expressions in the Torres Straits, "An incident, Captain?"
No, sir. An accident this time.
"Serious?"
Perhaps.
"Is the danger immediate?"
No.
"The Nautilus stranded?"
Yes.
"And this has happened how?"
From a caprice of nature, not from the ignorance of man. Not a mistake has been made in the working, but we cannot prevent equilibrium from producing its effects. We may brave human laws, but we cannot resist natural ones."
Captain Nemo had chosen a strange moment for uttering this philosophical reflection. On the whole, his answer helped me little. "May I ask, sir, the cause of this accident?"
An enormous block of ice, a whole mountain, has turned over. When icebergs are determined at their base by warmer water or reiterated shocks, their center of gravity rise, and the whole thing turns over. This is what has happened. One of the blocks, as it fell, struck the Nautilus, then gliding under its hull, raised it with irresistible force, bringing it into beds which are not so thick where it is laying on its side.
"But can we not get the Nautilus off by emptying its reservoirs, that it might regain its equilibrium?"
That, sir, is being done at the moment. You can hear the pump working. Look at the needle of the manometer. It shows the Nautilus is rising, but the block of ice is floating with it, and until some obstacle stops its ascending motion, our position cannot be altered.
Indeed, the Nautilus still held the same position to starboard. Doubtless it would right itself when the block stopped. But at this moment, who knows if we may not be frightfully crushed between two glassy surfaces. I reflected on all the consequences of our position. Captain Nemo never took his eyes off the manometer. Since the fall of the iceberg, the Nautilus had risen about 150 feet, but it still made the same angle with the perpendicular. Suddenly, a slight movement was felt in the hold. Evidently, it was righting a little. Things hanging in the saloon were sensibly returning to their normal position. The partitions were nearing the upright. No one spoke. With beating hearts, we watched and felt the straightening. The boards became horizontal under our feet. 10 minutes passed. "At last we have righted," I exclaimed.
Yes,
Said Captain Nemo, going to the door of the saloon. "But are we floating?"
certainly, he replied, since the reservoir are not empty, and when empty, the Nautilus must rise to the surface of the sea.
We were in an open sea, but at a distance of about 10 yards on either side of the Nautilus rose a dazzling wall of ice. Above and beneath the same wall. Above, because the lower surface of the iceberg stretched over us like an immense ceiling. Beneath, because the overturned block, having slid by degrees, had found a resting place on the lateral walls which kept it at that position. The Nautilus was really imprisoned in a perfect tunnel of ice more than 20 yards in breadth, filled with quiet water. It was easy to get out of it by going either forward or backward and then make a free passage under the iceberg some hundred of yards deeper. The luminous ceiling had been extinguished, but the saloon was still resplendent with intense light. It was a powerful reflection from the glass partition, sent violently back to the sheets of the lantern. I cannot describe the effect of the voltaic rays upon the great block so capriciously cut. Upon every angle, every ridge, every facet was thrown a different light, according to the nature of the veins running through the ice. A dazzling mine of gems, particularly of sapphires, their blue rays crossing with the green of the emerald. Here and there were opal shades of wonderful softness, running through bright spots like diamonds of fire, the brilliancy of which the eye could not bear. The power of the lantern seemed increased 100-fold, like a lamp through the lenticular plates of a first-class lighthouse. "How beautiful! How beautiful!" cried Conseil.
Yes,
I said. "It is a wonderful sight, is it not, Ned?"
yes, confound it, yes.
"It is superb. I am mad at being obliged to admit it. No one has ever seen anything like it, but the sight may cost us dear, and if I must say all, I think we are seeing here things which God never intended man to see." Ned was right. It was too beautiful. Suddenly, a cry from Conseil made me turn. "What is it?" I asked. "Shut your eyes, sir. Do not look, sir." Saying which, Conseil clapped his hands over his eyes. "But what is the matter, my boy? I am dazzled, blinded." My eyes turned involuntarily towards the glass, but I could not stand the fire which seemed to devour them. I understood what had happened. The Nautilus had put on full speed, and the quiet luster of the ice walls was at once changed into flashes of lightning. The fire from these myriads of diamonds was blinding, and it required some time to calm our troubled look. At last the hands were taken down. "Faith, I should not have believed it," said Conseil. It was then 5 in the morning, and in that moment a shock was felt at the bowels of the Nautilus. I knew that its spur had struck a block of ice. It must have been a false maneuver, for this submarine tunnel, obstructed by blocks, was not very easy navigation. I thought that Captain Nemo, by changing his course, would either turn these obstacles or else follow the windings of the tunnel. In any case, the road before us could not be entirely blocked, but, contrary to my expectations, the Nautilus took a decided retrograde motion. "We are going backwards," said Conseil. "Yes," I replied. "The end of the tunnel can have no egress." "And then?" "Then," said I, "the working is easy. We must go back again and go out at the southern opening. That is all." In speaking thus, I wished to appear more confident than I really was, but the retrograde motion of the Nautilus was increasing, and reversing the screw, it carried us at great speed.
"It will be a hindrance," said Ned.
"What does it matter? Some hours more or less, provided we get out at last." For a short time, I walked from the saloon and the library. Sorry, 1 second. For a short time, I walked from the saloon to the library. My companions were silent. I soon threw myself on an ottoman and took a book, which my eyes overran mechanically. A quarter of an hour after, Conseil, approaching me, said, "Is that what you're reading? Very interesting, sir." "Very interesting," I replied. "I should think so, sir. It's your own book you're reading." "My book?" And indeed, I was holding in my hand the work on the great submarine depths. I did not even dream of it. I closed the book and returned to my walk. Ned and Conseil rose to go. "Stay here, my friends," said I, detaining them. "Let us remain together until we are out of this block." "As you please, sir," Conseil replied. Some hours passed. I often looked at the instruments hanging from the partition. The manometer showed that the Nautilus kept at a constant depth of more than 300 yards. The compass still pointed to the south. The log indicated a speed of 20 miles an hour, which, in such a cramped space, was very great. But Captain Nemo knew that he could not hasten too much, and that minutes were worth ages to us. At 25 minutes past 8, a second shock took place, this time from behind, and I turned pale. My companions were close by my side. I seized Conseil's hands. Our looks expressed our feelings better than words. At this moment, the captain entered the saloon. I went up to him. "Our course is barred southward?" I asked.
Yes, sir. The iceberg has shifted and closed every outlet.
"We are blocked up, then?"
Yes.
End of chapter 15. That's a cliffhanger, huh? Encased in a trench, incredibly long, of ice above, below, northward, southward. It is here. We will leave our characters and find out what will happen next week. And we pretty much bisected the reading. We had 87 pages to go. We finished 44 and we are on 45. Again, these are full document pages, not book pages. What do we think? What do we think? It's a lot going on. A lot going on. A lot of discovery, a lot of action, a lot of adventure. A lot of insight into people. Ned Land getting quite perturbed. Captain Nemo showing a little bit more emotion, showing a recklessness in which he brutalized some of the local fauna, which he determined could be eradicated. A little moral high ground he has on what can and can't be exterminated. And claiming, then, Antarctica for Captain Nemo. So, a lot going on. There's a lot going on. What did we think? Did we like it? We still haven't finished this freaking marble map. This is the second week in a row we haven't finished a map. Which is a little nuts. A little nuts. Alright, let me